and it is on basic profile editing. Profiles are the pages that display records after they've been created. So whether that's a case, you look at a case, you're looking at the main profile, happens to be called for cases. You're looking at an existing time slip, there's a profile page is displaying that. You're looking at a user's record, that's a profile page displaying that, and so forth. So for nearly every record in the system, you're going to have a profile page. So we want to talk about which one of those that you can manipulate and how you can go about doing that. So the first thing I want to do is to point out your reference materials for this session. So on our demo site, I'm just going to open up the Help page, top-level Help tab, and another tab. I could scroll down into the Administration Tools section and go to the Process Management Help page here. The formatting and so forth is a little bit better on the community site. So I'm going to use the link on the left, go to Community Site. If you're using the legacy interface, that link will be over on the right-hand side. That link will automatically log you into our community site, which is the source of the help pages, some other information. And you may notice that the home page on the community site is the same links that you see on your help page. And if I scroll down into the Administration Tools section, I'm going to find the link for Process Management. And then today we're going to be focusing on the Profiles section down here. So that's your reference for going back later and looking at some of this information. As the help page explains, you work with your profiles over in the admin section and on the processes, forms, and profiles page, where if you've done any kind of process management, editing your intake forms or anything like that, you're going to be familiar with where this page is. So this page is where you can do all of your process management, or I should say most of your process management. And if you're not already familiar with the concept of modules, nearly everything in LegalServer is part of a module. You can see in the drop-down list, these are all the dynamic modules in LegalServer, which means they're modules that you can change as a site administrator. You can change certain things about them at least. And this is as opposed to static objects in LegalServer. And we'll talk a little bit more about the differences between those, between static and dynamic. But over here is where all the dynamic stuff is. I'm going to first go to the timekeeping module. Most of the modules that you'll deal with will just have one profile page. So if you have dynamic timekeeping on your site, then you'll have typically just one timekeeping time slip profile. The same thing for outreach, user profiles, and so forth. Now, the exception, as we'll see here in a minute, is in the Case Matter module, where you have a couple of other potential options there in terms of profile pages. Whichever module you choose, in this case timekeeping, if you go to the Profiles tab, that will list all of the dynamic profiles that exist on your site. On the demo site that we're looking at here, we just have one time slip profile page. And if I go, for example, to the Outreach module, you can see that we have 3 Outreach profile pages in the Outreach module. 2 of these are not active, so these are probably experiments that people have been playing around with. That's one of the things we'll see about profile pages. They can be active or inactive. So effectively, we just have one profile page being used in the Outreach module here. Now, if I flip back to the Case Matter module and go to the Profiles tab, see on this demo site we have a long list of profiles. So what we're seeing over here is that we have potentially 3 profiles that every site will typically see. There's going to be a main profile, which is what displays cases, open, pending, closed cases, and also rejected matters. Most every site will also have a pre-screen summary profile. Now, some sites, administrators have renamed this, so we see names like conflict check and pre-screen summary, or just conflict summary, something like that. But that's the profile that will display pre-screens. So if you use pre-screens on your site, you are probably familiar with the idea that you can start a pre-screen, and you can, of course, escalate a pre-screen to a full intake, but you can also just leave a pre-screen in a quote-unquote pending stage, so it's just a pre-screen record, and it shows up on the top-level cases page on a separate tab of pre-screens. So again, that's a record that's been created, and the pre-screen summary or some profile on your site is what's used to display information about that record. Also, you'll notice on this demo site, and you likely have at least 1 or 2 on your site, are print profiles. And I can tell that by the profile type column. Print profiles are things that appear in the new interface. They appear on the Views menu of a case, and they are just ways to display a subset of information about a case in a printer-friendly format. So you can print it out. If you're using the site is using the legacy interface, then you'll have a print tab over on the right sidebar that will contain your print profiles. So that's where they show up at that interface. Now, a record knows which profile to use to display itself by the process that created it. So I'm going to flip back over to the timekeeping module and go to the Processes tab. We can see on this demo site we just have one timekeeping process here. So our case time slip is a dynamic process. This demo site is using the static built-in processes for non-client time and outreach time, because I don't see anything here in the processes. But for the add case time, you can see that the follow-up profile is the time slip profile. And if I edit this process, and look at the very bottom of the process page, I can see this is where the follow-up profile is. So this is where you tell the process which profile to use. So you start the process, which is a link. That's going to display 1 or more forms. And our case here with adding a case time slip, it's just 1 form that's enabled. And then you're telling it what happens after the person fills out that form, clicks continue, save, whatever the button happens to be. So in this case, we're saying direct it to our dynamic time slip profile that we created. Now, we could have left this just blank, and then it would display with the static built-in time slip profile. But we want this process to use our dynamic one that we've created. So as I say, records will remember the process that created them. And so by virtue of remembering the process that created them, they will use this profile that's specified within the process. And where that can become relevant to you is that if you have a mix of static and dynamic on your site. So an example here with our demo site, our case time slips are dynamic, and they're going to use that dynamic profile. If I went to look at a outreach time slip on this site or a non-case time slip on this site, it would be displayed by the built-in static profile. And I don't have any control over that profile unlike I do with the time slip profile. The other way that this will come into play is if you convert from static to dynamic. So if your site, for example, has static outreach objects that you've been using, and then you decide you're going to convert over and build, a dynamic create form, dynamic create process, and a dynamic profile for your outreach. And so you'll do that, and you'll start testing that out, and then you'll go back and look at one of your older outreach records that was created with the static process, and you'll see it won't display with your shiny new outreach profile. And so what you have to understand is that's just a function of records remembering the process that created them. So if you do all your new stuff, then all of your newly created outreaches would display with your dynamic outreach profile. But again, the older records are still going to display with that old profile. All right, so let's look first at a pretty simple profile. And timekeeping tends to be one of the more simple profiles, not a lot of elements on it. So let's first look at the front end. So I'm just going to go to an existing time slip. And so I can tell that this is being displayed by the dynamic time slip profile, not just because of the header up here, but I can also see, like other dynamic things, you may know that you can tell if a particular page is a dynamic object by looking at its URL. And so it's probably hard to see on the remote screens, but if I look at the URL, I can see that this is the site name and then /service/dynamic profile/view/180. So I can tell that this particular time slip is being displayed by a dynamic profile. And I can manipulate this profile and work with it. So if I scroll down on this time slip profile, you can see this is a pretty basic profile, as most time slip profiles are. The date that it was entered, the date of service, caseworker, and so forth. And then this has a little extra section at the bottom that you won't see on the static profile, which is if the time slip has been updated, edited, who made the edit, and the time that they made that edit there. Now, to work with this profile to edit it, then I've got two ways that I can do that. If I've enabled the edit form permission in my user role, then I will have an admin menu up here and an edit profile link. And this will just take me to the back end of this profile where I can manipulate it. If for some reason you don't see the admin menu, you don't have that link on your site, you can always just go to the admin page to processes, forms, and profiles, as we did earlier. Change to the timekeeping module, whichever module you're working with, and then look at the profiles list and edit it directly from there. That would take you to the same spot that we are here. It's just a few more clicks. If you've done any form editing in LegalServer, you'll notice that editing a profile is very similar. So you have a name and description section at the top. This is, for profile pages, is much simpler than forms and processes. So the only thing to specify here, or that's required, is the name of the profile. It can be whatever you want. You don't have to call this time slip profile. So you could call it time profile, timekeeping profile, whatever you wanted to call it. The description is optional. That doesn't affect the profile itself. This just shows up when you're looking at the process management page and you're looking at your list of profiles. You see whatever text is in that description. The continue button text, you can typically just leave that blank. Most profile pages don't have a continue button. And so even if you put something in there, it wouldn't do anything. Active yes or no is a required field. Of course, if you want to be able to, or you want to be using your dynamic profile, you'll want active set to yes. This does give you the ability to, to build profiles and flip back and forth between different ones. And so, for example, if I inactivated this time slip profile, then my add case time process that's currently using this profile would revert back to using the static built-in profile. We come down into the form element section. And so again, if you've worked with forms in LegalServer, this section will look familiar to you. In the case of this time slip profiles, as I say, it's fairly simple, and it's just a list of fields. We do have two block elements on here. One is a block that puts the edit button on the profile, and the other is the timekeeping object block, which is what displays, if this time slip is linked to a case, then it shows the clickable link for the client name and the case number. As you can see, the rest of these are just fields. We have two field set objects here. Those are what are put putting the heading on the page that we saw. Just like with forms, if you want to add elements to your profile, you come down in the Form Elements section. You have a drop-down box where you can add headers, field sets, fields, blocks, instructions, break white space. You can also add list views. We won't go over all of these elements in detail. We do that in another session on basic form editing. But you can use all of those elements on a time-slip profile. Blocks you can put on a profile page. Some blocks you just have to kind of experiment with certain blocks as to whether or not they work well on a profile page as opposed to a form. So one example is it's not relevant to time slips, but if you're working on a profile page on a case matter module, there's a block for address that most people are familiar with. Very typically it's on your intake form, and it displays the zip code. Somebody types in a zip code, it fills out the city and the state, county of residence, and possibly county dispute, and so forth. So there's several elements on there. Now the address block, if you put it on a profile, it works well on profiles, because what it will do is instead of displaying all those fields for editing, it's been designed so that it will display the address information in a nice little compact form on the profile. Other blocks won't work well on profiles. As I say, you just have to kind of experiment with which ones will work well, which ones you would have to, or you may want to pull out the individual field elements that the block would typically display on data entry form. There are some blocks that just definitely will not work on profiles. So, for example, the financial information block. You can put that on a profile and it will display, but it won't work because there's no way to submit that information. So the financial information block, as an example, is expecting to let you enter information, but then that information needs to be submitted or saved, and there's no way to do that when you put it on a profile. So for a block like financial information, you need to pull out the individual fields that you want to display on the profile itself. Another example would be like outcomes. The outcomes blocks do not work well on profile pages and typically won't work at all. So your alternative there is for outcomes is there's a list view that you can use to display outcomes on a profile. As I say, for some of the stuff with blocks, list views, you just have to kind of experiment with those sometimes to see what's going to work and what's going to work best well on a particular profile. Now, one distinction with fields and even with blocks on profiles versus forms, data entry forms, is that on data entry forms, of course, everything is editable by default. So if you put a date field on an intake form, then by default it's going to be editable. The reverse is true on profile pages. Everything is not editable by default because profile pages are designed to display information about an existing record as opposed to doing data entry. Now you can, however, make fields editable directly on a main profile. And to do that for any individual field, once you have it on your profile, if you expand the options for that field, there is a simple checkbox here called editable. This is what you'll see on all of the other modules except for case matter. And when we go back and look at a profile in a case matter module, we'll see we have some more complicated options there. But if you think it's appropriate to let people change something directly on a profile as opposed to looking at the profile and then going to the Actions menu link and changing information that way, you can make it editable directly. Scrolling a little bit farther down, profile pages also have a side action elements section. On some profiles, like the time slip profile, you'll have nothing in the side action elements. It's just not relevant for a time slip. For most of your other modules, you will have some side action elements that will go in there. That's a whole topic unto itself, so we're not going to cover that in this particular session. And then the final two things that you have on the profile edit page is a checkbox where you can delete existing disabled elements. So if I had some disabled elements that had kind of stacked up here in the form element section, then I wanted to get rid of those off of this form completely, then I could check that box, and then when I click continue, it would delete those. Otherwise, they will just stay on the form forever. And as with your editing your forms, you have a view log link. That will open up another browser window or browser tab, depending on your browser settings. And it will show you who's the last, or who has submitted this form and the date and time that they did that. Currently, the view log on profile pages as well as forms won't tell you if what somebody has changed. So can't currently do that. If they have deleted things, it will tell you, what they deleted off of the form. So since I used the admin edit profile link to edit this profile, when I click continue, then that's going to take me directly back to my profile. So again, that admin edit profile just saves me a few clicks. I could also, many people, what they will do when they're working on a profile like this, they'll have the profile in one window, and then they'll open up the admin page in another tab, or even another browser window. And they would go into process management, processes, forms, and profiles. Find their profile page. So in this case, we're looking at timekeeping. Go to the Profiles tab, click on the profile to edit it. So as you can see, we're back to the same place that we just were. And then what they would do is, so if you're experimenting, is what's a list view going to look like on a form or something like that, then I'll just add a list view. The field elements, the blocks, the list views, I forgot to point out earlier, as they do with forms, they're going to vary depending on the module you're working in. So the field list, if you're in the time slip module, is going to be only fields that are relevant to that module. The same with your blocks and your list views. So I can see in the time slip timekeeping module, I only have one list view available. So if you look over in the case matter module, working with a profile or form, you'll know that there are quite a few different list views. But here there's only one list view available, last 5 time entries. So I'll select that. I'll click on the Add button. That'll refresh the page. That'll put whatever element I just added at the very bottom. Just like with forms, I can drag these elements around to change the order that they appear on the page. So coming back to the idea of experimenting with changing the profile, seeing what things look like, then I would add an element like that list view. Click on Continue to save it. Then I can flip back over to my other tab where I have a time slip profile displayed. And I can just refresh the page with my browser's refresh button. And so now if I scroll down, I can see there is the list view element that I added, which is showing the last 5 time slips that have been entered under this account. So this, for example, if I wanted to leave that list view on there, I would probably want to add another header element here so it's clear and put last 5 time slips or something like that in there so people understand what it means, and also just to get some visual separation there. Or if I see that and decide I don't want that on there, I can flip back to my other tab, click on the time slip profile again, now I can scroll down, just disable, drag that list view element down into disabled, click on Continue, save my changes, and again, come back to my other tab, refresh the page, and I'll see that that list view disappears. All right, let's see that we have a comment posted in the questions that the audio is breaking up. So to the extent that that's happening, I apologize for it. I'll just double check. I don't see that there's anything showing up necessarily wrong on this end. So hopefully it's not too terrible. All right, so that's a very basic profile. Let's now change over and look at a case profile. Which on every site, you're going to have a main profile page, which is going to be the name of it, and that's just set on every site, which is going to display cases. And so if I just go to any case on the site here, it's going to be displayed, again, by the main profile, and I can see that in the breadcrumbs here. And the main profile is typically the most complex profile page that you'll have on your site. Now, things are displaying a little bit differently here if your site uses the legacy interface versus the new interface. But all the concepts that we're going to talk about are the same. The major differences are that the sidebar that you see on the right side on legacy sites is over on the left side. And most of the links that appear on the right side in the legacy interface are typically moved into the Actions menu in the new interface when people set up their main profiles. But the things that we're going to talk about specifically here in this session, which is the main part of the page here, those things are going to be the same in terms of the tab block elements and so forth. Now, typically a main profile is a series of tabs, groups of tabs, and as we'll see, those elements are called tab block elements. So in this example, we have a tab, which is just a little caret symbol, and it shows some information. And then we have the contacts tab, the time tab, financial tab, and so forth. A little bit farther down the page, we have a second group of tabs. It starts out with documents. Third group of tabs, client, demographics, adverse parties. And then another group of tabs starts out with case notes, disposition history. I think that is the last group on there. So let's look at the back end of this profile and see how these elements are constructed. So again, I'm going to use my admin edit profile link. Or I could go to the admin process forms and profiles page. The default module will be case matter, and just look at the profile page, the main profile there. So again, we have a name description section, so it's just main profile. In theory, you can change the name of the main profile. I would not recommend that, just because all of the documentation and everything revolves around that being called the main profile. You can see on this site there is actually some continue button text in here. It doesn't do anything, so you can actually just take that out. And the main profile is active. You can also see one of the differences between profile pages and all of your other modules and profile pages in the case matter module is we have a permission section in case matter. And these are the same permissions that you would see on processes, which create links. So that gives you the ability to control which user roles, people per user role, who can see a link and click on it. You have the same concept with profile pages over in the case matter module. Now, the main profile, you would typically, every role is going to have full permission on it because that's what's going to display cases, except for the pro bono restricted access role, which is a standard role on every site. It has a limited permission, and that just relates back to people assigned to that role typically can only see cases that they are assigned to, and so that's part of restricting that particular role. Where the permissions would really come into play is if you decide to set up what are called profile views, which allows you to display cases based on certain criteria like legal problem code and so forth. And so if a case is assigned to a bankruptcy legal problem code, you can have it display instead of with the main profile with a different profile view. And so all of those profiles and the profile views can have permissions associated with them. Now, coming down into the form elements section, you can see that this is also very similar to the forms and the time-slip profile that we saw. The difference here is that a typical main profile, instead of having a bunch of fields directly on it, is going to have a series of tab blocks like this main profile does. And almost certainly the main profile on your site also is a series of tab blocks. So it's just like a kind of a second level to organizing things here. So this first tab block, the top row, you can see I have an edit link for it. If I click the edit link, that will automatically open up in a new browser tab or window. And this gives me the page where I can edit that tab block. So the tab block can have a name. Now, end users don't see this name anywhere. So that's just a name that's going to make sense from an administration perspective. The description also would just appear in the list of tab blocks. Continue button is also pretty much irrelevant. There's some other options on a tab block that are and are not going to make sense. So skip this form when generating processes of PDF is going to default to no. Typically just leave it at that. Also, tab blocks can be active or inactive. So if you've created a tab block and decide you don't want to use it anymore, you can mark it as inactive so it's not kind of cluttering things up. Add continue button is going to default to yes, but it also is pretty much irrelevant in terms of a tab block. It really won't display anything. And then the final field is half width. So if you only want a tab block to take up half of that main section of the page, then you can make the tab block do that. The default is no, and probably if your site's using the new interface, typically you're going to leave that at no and just have that that tab block, that group of tabs, extend across the entire main section of the page there. With tab blocks work a little bit better in the legacy interface. Now, if we come down to the form element section, we can see this is where all the actual information is getting put on this profile. So you may recall that that first group of tabs, there was a tab with a little caret symbol. And then here we have a block for case identification. That's what's displaying the client's name and case number in bold, large bold letters. A couple of other blocks regarding other cases for this client, master subordinate cases. Then we have another tab for contacts. So that's what is putting that second tab label up there. All these tab labels you control. So when you expand the option for a tab start element, it has a text box, and you can put in whatever text is going to make sense for you there. And then so contacts is followed by a list view element, which is to display all of the case contacts. There's another tab for time that also has a list view, which is the timekeeping log for the case, and so on down the line there. So as you can see, there's a lot of elements on this top row tab block, and if we went to the second tab block and so forth, we would see the same thing repeating over and over. Also, just like when we were looking at the simple time slip profile, all of these fields and elements, they're going to not be editable directly on the profile itself unless you, as the site administrator, change the default. So let's just look at the options when you open up a field element. So I open up the options for percentage of poverty. And you can see instead of just a simple checkbox for editable yes or no, you have a whole series of checkboxes, and you probably recognize that those relate to the dispositions that a matter can have. So it can be a pre-screen, it can be an incomplete intake, pending open closed case or rejected matter. So if I wanted percentage of poverty to be directly editable when somebody's looking at a case, then I can decide, okay, I'll let them edit it when it's an open case. Maybe I'll let them edit it when it's a pending case, but I'm not going to check the rejected box. So if this becomes a rejected matter, they won't be able to click on that field name and edit that information. And likewise, if I don't check the closed box, they're not going to be able to edit it after a case is closed. Now, percentage of poverty is a field that you almost never would want people to be able to edit directly like that. So they would go to an action menu link like edit financial information or something like that to change that information. But there may be fields that you want to let people directly edit. So see, we don't have number helped, the number of people in the household. You also probably don't want to let people directly edit. But reporting organizations is an example. So if I expand the options there, I can see that on the main profile for our demo site that people can edit that field. So they could change the referring organizations, whether it's a closed, open, pending case, or even on a rejected matter. Your blocks are going to work the same way. So let's see if we have an appropriate block here in this section. Don't know that we have any blocks. The transfer status data is not one that you would let people edit. But just to show you the example there, that the same thing, you can decide if, let's say this was the address block, and so it was showing address information. You want people to be able to change that information directly on the profile. Now, since this is a block, you can say, yes, I want people to be able to edit it, for example, when it's an open case but not in a closed case. And that will typically, for a block, would open up a light window or a pop-up window on top of the main profile, and we display whatever fields that block displays. You also have an option to start an aux process, which is start an auxiliary process. And so what you could do, for example, is if this was the address block, you could let people edit that directly in a light window, in that pop-up window, or you could send them to an auxiliary process that might be something like, edit client's address or something like that. Don't know if we even have that particular process on. So we have one here called address extended address. So maybe you want people to be taken to that auxiliary form instead of doing it inside the pop-up window there. Scrolling on down the page a little bit farther, the side action elements, they don't apply to tab blocks. That'll be controlled on the main profile. So you can skip over that. And again, you have the option to, if you have a bunch of disabled elements, like we have up here on this tab block, so people have been in here experimenting, moving things around, then we could delete all of those after we click continue. So that takes us back to the main administration page, and I'll close up this tab. And as you may recall, where we started, we edited the main profile, and then we clicked the edit link for this first tab block. That opens up that separate browser tab. And so now we're back on editing the main profile. And if we were done here, we could just click continue to return back to the main profile. Or if we wanted to edit one of these other tab blocks, obviously we could click on the edit link there. Now, the side action elements for the main profile, just like all of the fields and other elements on your main profile tends to be the most complicated. Also, the side action elements tends to be the most complicated. Unlike we saw with the time slip profile, we had nothing in side action element section. And if you're looking at an outreach or some other type of record, you may just have one or two elements. So this session, the side action elements, or controlling the right side, controlling the actions menu on cases, is an entirely separate session. So we're not going to be getting into that in this session. So So if I come down and click on continue, then since I used that admin edit profile link, that brought me back to the main profile here. So those are the topics that we like to cover in this session on basic profile editing. I want to make sure that I haven't missed any questions in the questions panel, and also that I haven't missed any hands raised in case people do have questions. So we do have a question about the side action elements when we're going to do a session on that. So we don't have a specific date at this point, but definitely hope to offer that in March. So keep an eye on the training sessions, and of course we'll post to the site administrators list when we update and open up the March sessions. All right, so I don't see any other questions posted, don't see any hands raised. I hope people found this helpful. I do always tell people if it's new to you editing profile pages like this, that some of your simpler ones, you can see those are pretty straightforward to do, especially when you start working with the main profile. There's a lot of pieces to it, but it's not really as bad as it first seems. It's just a matter of, especially with you're working with a tab block, so you have kind of like two different levels that you're going down there in terms of arranging things, then of course deciding what's editable and so forth. But so there are a lot of pieces to it, but if you stick with it, you'll get it. So make your changes, flip back over to your profile, refresh, see what your change looks like, and just kind of iterate from there. All right. Goodbye, everyone.